Let's get into our first mental health condition, that is major depressive disorder. What makes major depressive disorder a condition versus just say sadness? Because people often use the word depression casually. They'll say, I'm depressed, I'm experiencing some depressive episodes, but how do we know if it's more sadness related to something that's situational, or how do we know that it's more serious because it's actually a mental health condition? Well, let me tell you how. Let's go back to our framework with those 5 essentials that we talked about, and let's first start with symptoms. Major depressive disorder is characterized by low mood, a depressed mood, and or sometimes within the Black community, an irritable mood, right? That is the hallmark. What other symptoms do you experience aside from just that depressed mood or that irritability? You experience a disruption in your thoughts, right? We call them our thinking styles and our thoughts. It feels like the negative triad. When we talk about the negative triad, we talk about negative perceptions of myself, a negative perceptions of the people in the world, and negative perception about the future. When you're in that depressed mode, your view about yourself, about others, and about the future is very low and it's very bleak because it's interrupted by something called our neurotransmitters, right? Because they impact our capacity to be able to have a positive outlook. These symptoms are just not about wielding yourself out of them. There is something chemical that's happening that's making our mood low, that's impacting our thought process. Additional symptoms that are characterized with major depressive disorder is also now your energy is impacted. So you have low energy, you're fatigued, you may have what we call sometimes psychomotor agitation, where you're feeling agitated in your body and or maybe lethargic sometimes. Your appetite is interrupted. You don't eat as much as you used to. You don't have much of an appetite, or you eat more. Your sleep is disturbed. You can find yourself sleeping more or have disrupted REM sleep. So when we're talking about major depressive disorder, we're talking about these symptoms because something is happening chemically within our brains. Our serotonin, our endorphins, our norepinephrine, our epinephrine, these what we call neurotransmitters are not firing at the level that they should. And because they're not firing, that's what makes it a condition, because that condition creates these sets of symptoms that include depressed mood, low mood, interrupting in our thinking, interrupting in our energy level, interrupting our sleep, interrupting our appetite. Then, so when we talk about those essentials, what are the symptoms, how many, and how long have we experienced them? Major depressive disorder is diagnosed when there is an episode, right? You can have a single episode or you can have recurring episodes. And those episodes have to be at least 2 weeks. So if you're experiencing these symptoms for at least a 2-week period, then you have now moved from just, I'm having a bad day, I had a bad day at work, I had a bad game, I'm having a difficult time in my relationship. You've now experienced these symptoms for an extended period of time, which now makes it an episode. And now we're getting into those cycles of depression. So now that we know that episode, how is it interrupting me, right? We talked about that 5th thing. How does it interrupt your functioning? Is it harder for you to do basic things like get out of bed? Getting out of bed takes more energy. It takes more time. It's hard for you to do basic things like take care of your hygiene, brush your teeth, and showering feels like an accomplishment throughout the day. This is not anything to be ashamed of. This is not anything to be down on yourself about, because remember, as I said, just like with any other condition, something's happening in our body, in our brains, that's interrupting us and impacting us. And this is what makes major depressive disorder so challenging, because people feel, I should be able to have this energy. Why am I thinking so negatively? Or they don't have the wherewithal to often know that their thinking is being clouded by major depressive disorder. They just feel like this is what it is. So I want to mention another symptom that I missed earlier on, which goes back to that negative triad, is hopelessness. When you're in a major depressive episode, which is part of the major depressive disorder, you have some hopelessness because, again, that dopamine, that norepinephrine, the epinephrine, the serotonin, the feel-good hormones, or the feel-good neurotransmitters that we should have aren't there. And so it impacts how we feel, how we think, and our energy. So major depressive disorder is characterized by these depressive episodes that most often come in cycles, right? So yes, you can have a single episode, but more than likely the chances are high that you have recurrent episodes. And people often ask me, well, what makes the episode come above? What is it a product of? This is what I call the whole nature and nurture. Sometimes we are genetically predisposed to having depressive disorder. And so that's what the nature is. But then the nurture comes from what's happening in our environment. So is there a stressor that we experience? Was there a job loss, a loss of a family member? Was there persistent challenges that you kept going through that brought on that episode? Because stress is a hormone that makes us very vulnerable to a lot of conditions. And so when we have major depressive disorder, most likely we're genetically predisposed to it, and we're experiencing some type of stressor that collectively comes together and creates this condition, and then we experience these episodes. So I want to recount, drop in the comments, what are the characteristics of major depressive disorder? What symptoms do people usually experience? Disruption in mood, disruption in their thinking, disruption in their energy, disruption in their sleep, disruption in their appetite, right? How often do they experience these symptoms, or for how long? Usually 2 weeks at a time, and they most often come in cycles brought on by stressors, extreme stressors or persistent stressors, and they begin to impact our functioning, our capacity to do take care of our basic needs, our basic hygiene, our capacity to go to work, to concentrate, to get things done, our ability to want to connect with others. Most often, people who are experiencing a depressive episode for major depressive disorder want to isolate. They feel feelings of hopelessness, and that can make life get away from them, and the problems and the symptoms begin to compound. Major depressive disorder is so common, y'all, so common that we call it the common cold of mental health. That is how often we experience major depressive disorder. So that is our first condition, major depressive disorder, the symptoms, how many, the duration, how often, and the impact. Y'all stay tuned.